Dear students, I am Dr. Muralidhar from Department of Botany, Government First Grade College of Arts, Science, Commerce, Shira. Let us move on to the next session, Absorption of Water, under Unit 1, Plant Water Relations of Paper 7, Plant Physiology and Metabolism. Students, you are aware of the fact that the water is being absorbed by the plants, by the root system in higher plants, especially in higher plants. In lower plants, general surface of the body act as the absorbing organ. In higher plants, water is absorbed through the root hairs, which are in contact with the soil water and form a root hair zone a little behind the root tips. Root hairs in general are tubular or hair-like prolongations or extensions of the cells of the epidermis or epiblema of the roots. The wall of the root hairs are permeable, means to say which permits the passage of the for the entry of solvents and solutes, permeable membrane consists of made up of pectic substances and cellulose which are strongly hydrophilic, that means to say showing affinity towards water. Root hairs contain vacuoles filled with the sap at the center. When roots elongate, the older hairs die and new root hairs are developed so that they are in contact with the fresh supplies of the water in the soil. The diagram that you are seeing in this slide is the structure of a root hair, where you can see the tertiary roots and secondary roots, maturation zone, root hair zone, and zone of elongation, meristematic zone, root cap, and others. As far as mechanism of water absorption is concerned, water absorption is of two types. One is active absorption of water, and the other is passive absorption of water. What is active absorption of water? It is a process of absorption of water where the root cells play an active role in the absorption phenomena, where metabolic energy released during respiration is being utilized for absorption. This type of absorption is referred as active absorption of water. It is of two types: active osmotic absorption and active non-osmotic absorption. If the active absorption of water is according to osmotic gradient, it will be referred as active osmotic absorption. On the other hand, if the absorption of water is against the osmotic gradient, then such an absorption is called as non-osmotic active absorption. Coming to the passive absorption, it means to say that the root hair cells do not play any active role. Instead, they remain very passive in the mechanism of absorption of water. In such cases, absorption takes place mainly due to the energy or the pull or the force which is created during transpiration, which is called as transpiration pull. Such an absorption of water which takes place due to a transpiration pull, where the root cells are remained very passively, is what is referred as passive absorption. Coming to the mechanism of water absorption, how water absorption actually takes place means, as I said already, it is of two types: active absorption and passive absorption. If we consider the active absorption, it is again of two types, osmotic and non-osmotic. Let us consider active osmotic absorption of water. Here, the osmotic absorption of water is the imbibition of soil water by the hydrophilic cell walls of the root hairs. Root hair cell wall is always showing a tendency towards water, hence they are referred as hydrophilic. Osmotic pressure of the cell sap of the root hairs is usually higher than the osmotic pressure of water around the root, that is soil water. Therefore, the diffusion pressure deficit and the suction pressure in the root hairs become higher, and water from the cell wall enters through plasma membranes, which act as semi-permeable membrane by a process called as osmotic diffusion. As a result, the osmotic pressure, suction pressure, and diffusion pressure deficit of the root hairs now become lower while their turgor pressure is increased. This is the structure of a root hair, where, as you can see, it is a cross sectional view of or a transverse section of a root, where it shows extension, that is unicellular extension in some cells of the epidermis, which is referred as root hair. And that root hair here, below the epidermis are the cortical cells made up of parenchyma, and they are loosely arranged showing intercellular spaces. Below the cortex is the stellar region, which is surrounded by the endodermis, which is similar to epidermis in its structure but shows the presence of Casparian thickenings. Next to endodermis is the pericycle, made up of unilayered thin-walled cells, which encloses the stele, where the stele contains xylem, phloem, and pith. When this being the case, the root hair absorbs water, and the water which is absorbed by the root hair will be traveled through the cortical cells, cell to cell transfer. Ultimately, it reaches the endodermis, and from the endodermis through passage cells which lacks Casparian thickenings, the water enters into pericycle. From there, it enters into the xylem, and from the xylem, the actual path of ascent of sap proceeds. Here, the mechanism of absorption clearly says that the cortical cells, that is made out of parenchyma, adjacent to the root hairs, have higher osmotic pressure, suction pressure, and DPD in comparison to the root hairs, where the root hair has a lower DPD. As a result, the water always flows from a region of lower DPD to the region of higher DPD. Hence, the water flows from the root hair into the cortical cells by osmotic diffusion. In the same way, the water by cell to cell osmotic diffusion gradually reaches the innermost cortical cells, that is the endodermis. Osmotic diffusion of water into endodermis takes place through special thin-walled passage cells, because the other endodermal cells, as I said earlier, shows the Casparian depositions on their walls, which makes them impermeable. So the water from the endodermal cells is drawn again into the cells of the pericycle by osmotic diffusion, and now becomes turgid, and their suction pressure is decreased. In the last step, the water is drawn into the xylem from the turgid pericycle cells, where it is because in the absence of turgor pressure of the xylem vessels, The suction pressure of xylem vessels becomes higher than the suction pressure of the cells of the pericycle. When water enters into the xylem from pericycle, a pressure is developed in the xylem of the roots which can raise the water to the certain heights in the xylem. This pressure is called as root pressure. That is about the active absorption. Now, active osmotic absorption. So, if we look into the mechanism how the water is being absorbed during active non-osmotic absorption, here sometimes it is observed that absorption of water takes place even when the osmotic pressure of the soil water is higher than the osmotic pressure of the cell sap, which is against the osmotic gradient, requires the expenditure of metabolic energy, probably which is created during respiration. The factors which inhibit respiration also decrease water absorption. Factors which retard metabolic activities of the root cells also retard water absorption, reduce water absorption. Growth hormones like auxins, which increase metabolic activities of the cells, stimulate absorption of water. As a result, absorption takes place against the non-osmotic gradient. Coming to the passive absorption of water, passive absorption of water takes place when a rate of transpiration is usually high, because it is already been told that during passive absorption, the cells of the root are not active, they remain passive. But the energy required for absorption of water will be transferred from some other part of the plant body where the energy is created to the root hairs for absorption. Being passive, by utilizing the energy which is created in some other part of the plant body, the root hairs able to absorb water. This phenomena is called as passive absorption of water. Rapid evaporation of water from the leaves during transpiration creates a tension in water in the xylem of the leaves. Tension means pressure. The pressure which is created in the mesophyll cells of the leaf during transpiration will be transmitted down through the cavity of the xylem to the stem, and ultimately it reaches the roots. Water rises upward to reach the transpiring surface. As a result, soil water enters into the cortical cells through the root hairs to reach the xylem of the roots to maintain the supply of water. The force for this entry of water is created in the mesophyll cells of the leaf due to a process called transpiration. It is already told, and hence the root cells remains passive during this process, but still they absorb water, hence the name passive absorption of water. During absorption of water by the roots, the flow of water from epidermis to endodermis may take place through three different pathways: apoplastic pathway, transmembrane pathway, symplast pathway, through openings called plasmodesmata. The mechanism of water absorption, which is described earlier, in fact belongs to the second category, that is transmembrane pathway, where the absorption takes place across the plasma membranes which act as semi-permeable membranes. The relative importance of these three pathways in water absorption by roots is not clearly established. However, a combination of these three pathways is responsible for transport of water across the root system. In nutshell, it is very clear that how water is being absorbed by the plant body. To summarize this, water absorbing organ will be the root hair always, and the absorption is mainly by two mechanisms. One is asthma active, other one is passive. The active absorption is of two types: osmotic absorption and non-osmotic absorption, and the other one is the passive absorption. Thank you.